Islam goes down, moderate Islam follows papal-led Christianity, and a small number of Muslims and a small number of Christians follow Jesus as their Lord and Savior, and the Bible as their authority. That's actually the good news of Daniel 11. Now let's work on it. So it is both literal and global religious. When Jesus talked about Daniel, he gave it a literal explanation in Matthew 24 about the fall of Jerusalem, literally the city of Jerusalem, and Daniel. Then he gave it to that wider religious application for his Israel of faith all over the world. And I just have this feeling if Jesus can apply it both ways, it's okay for me to do it both ways. And that's what we do in this understanding. Now, I just went over that. I want to show you on the graph. First conflict is the Crusades. Second one's the Ottoman Empire. By the way, you see these numbers up here? There's your first woe, second woe. There were two aspects of the first woe. There was another one right in here. But then you have a third woe. Daniel has three conflicts between North and the South, Islam and Christian. Revelation has three woes. You go back and look in the Adventist Pioneers chart, and you're going to find the first and second woe were clearly understood to be Saracen, Arab Islam, first one, Ottoman Islam, second one. This actually matches what the pioneers taught in many aspects there. Take a look at Daniel 11:29. I want to now show you that after the time of the cross, there are still some very literal things in Daniel chapter 11. It's an amazing series of events that were played out very literally. At the appointed time, he, the king of the north, mentioned here, shall return and go towards the south, but it shall not be like the former or the latter. So right here you have three conflicts. There's the appointed time, the former, and the latter. The former would be the Crusades. This is the time of the end, and this is the one in the middle. During the first and the third, the king of the north, papal-led Christianity, gets control of Jerusalem. During the second one, it would be different. And obviously, during the Ottoman Empire, they did not get it. We have that in history now. But so he's going to head south, but it won't be like the first and the third. Why not? For ships from Cyprus shall come against him. Therefore, he shall be grieved and return in rage against the holy covenant and do damage. So he shall return and show regard for those who forsake the holy covenant. Now, let me explain what was going on. Once we get into the Ottoman time period, we're going to have a conflict where the king of the north is going to try to head south, but he's going to be stopped by ships from Cyprus, and he's going to return home in a rage against the covenant. Well, we have that specifically in that sequence in history. Cyprus is under attack. The Muslims are trying to take Cyprus. They were pushing the boundaries way up here, and they wanted Cyprus. This is the Venetian Ottomans War, and we're looking specifically at 1571. The Turks are attacking Cyprus. The Pope says, no way, we're not giving up Cyprus. We want Cyprus as a way to get stepping stone into Jerusalem. So he calls together the nations of Europe, and they put together a fleet, and they bring it in here, called the Holy League, and they have about 300 ships. It's not a little battle that's shaping up. The Muslims realize what's going on. They send their own fleet of 300 ships out here to Cyprus, drop off 15,000 foot soldiers, and then their fleet heads west to pick up the Christian fleet coming in. Those 15,000 soldiers actually finish off Cyprus. Now, lest you think they were very nice about it, the Muslims and the Christians were both double-crossing each other all the time. The last fortress to fall, they tell the Christian commander, surrender, and we'll let you have a ship to sail out of here. He surrenders, and they literally tied him to a stake and skinned him alive. The Christians found out about it, and they're furious as their fleet is now headed towards Cyprus. The two fleets meet right in here in the Battle of Lepanto. In a couple hours one afternoon, over 50,000 men died. The Christian fleet won the fight. The Muslim fleet was decimated, but the Christian fleet was so badly damaged that it returned and went home. Now, remember the prophecy. The king of the north is going to head towards the south again, but he's going to be stopped by ships from Cyprus, and that fleet that they met was from Cyprus. Get this. Both the Muslim and the Christian fleet believed they were fighting the battle of Daniel 11, verse 30. Both sides believed that. They were both studying Daniel. Where did that one go? That was forgotten until some historians recently in their doctoral dissertations dug through all the records of that battle and found out both sides believed it was a biblical battle. And so praise the Lord sometimes for doctoral dissertations. But it says he's going to head south and be stopped. He's going to return home against rage against the covenant. So here's what happens. Right after they win, the Pope commissions this painting to go up in the Vatican. This is the Muslim side. You can tell because they have skeletons and they're not so happy. So the Muslim side loses in this stylized painting. And he wanted to put beside it a picture of retaking Cyprus and another one of taking Jerusalem. But that does not happen. So what takes its place? A picture, actually two pictures, of the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre in 1572, the next year. So they send their fleet down, they get stopped by ships from Cyprus, they come home, they double cross a large number of Huguenots, which were those who were following the Bible instead of traditions. And they were told that they would be left alone, and instead, when they got together, they were massacred. In a week's time, over 70,000 of them died in France. And then the Pope puts up pictures celebrating, and here's the leader of the Huguenots being thrown out of his bedroom window. They stripped him naked and threw him out while they were killing his followers on the streets. Prophecy is he's going to head south, be stopped by ships from Cyprus, return in a rage against the covenant. And that's exactly what the paintings at the Vatican depict as they celebrated their, quote, victories. Anyway, now we get to the time of the end conflict. And here's where it should get really interesting for you. Everything up to this point is just history. But all of a sudden it changes because we're dealing with the time of the end where we live. To know that history's been fulfilled moment, step by step, in exact sequence and exactly as written is important because it should continue in the same way. Here's what it says. At the time of the end, so I'm not making this up, it flat out tells you this is at the time of the end. The king of the south, if I'm right, that's Islam, radical Islam is going to push against the king of the north and attack him. And the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots, horsemen, and many ships. He shall enter the countries, overwhelm them, and pass through. It's like a whirlwind. Tornadoes don't take long, do they? Neither do larger whirlwinds called hurricanes. And we have family in southern Louisiana, so we're watching what's going on the 16th anniversary of Katrina as another one comes in tomorrow. But how long does it take for a whirlwind? Tornado, a few seconds, few minutes. Hurricane, a day when it's actually around. And they do great destruction rather rapidly. The first conflict took centuries. The second conflict took centuries. The third one is likely to be relatively fast. Both like a whirlwind, it enters countries and overwhelms them and passes through. The military language is relatively fast as well. So I don't have any time prophecies for it. I just expect it to be relatively short in comparison to the others. So what's short in comparison to centuries? Decades? Years? Months? I don't know. I will know for sure when it's done. He shall also enter the glorious land, that's Israel. King of the north, the papacy had Israel during the Crusades for about 100 years. Once again, right at the end, he's going to get it. And many countries shall be overthrown, but these shall escape from his hand. Edom, Moab, and the prominent people of Ammon. That's Western Jordan today. He shall stretch out his hand against the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. He shall have power over the treasures of gold and silver and over all the precious things of Egypt. Also the Libyans and Ethiopians shall follow at his heels. that shows a three-way split of Islam. Those who are overthrown, those who follow, and those who are delivered. By the way, look at the countries named: Western Jordan, Egypt, Libya, and Ethiopia. Here are those secular Western nations. By the way, Ethiopia would more clearly be part of Ethiopia and all of Sudan today, biblically. So are those Muslim, secular, or atheistic countries? That's all the Muslim sphere of influence. When the king of the south goes down, it names Muslim areas. Isn't that interesting? So let's work on this a little bit. The black line is showing what I believe to be radical Islam, the caliphate believers going down. Radical Islam with the Muslim Brotherhood had its foundings, modern radical Islam, in Egypt in the 1920s. Oh, Egypt and many go down. Moderate Islam, those who are not radicals, will cooperate with papal-led Christianity. And some Christians and some Muslims will join together to give God's last day warning to the world before Jesus delivers his people to close of the judgment. What's amazing is Daniel 11:12 is written to give us what is happening as a warning just before Jesus finishes the judgment. And friends, the world events around you are telling you the judgment is about to close. That's what this is for. It's about getting serious with your relationship with Jesus Christ, getting serious about reaching people, and that you cannot hate anybody. You've got to love everyone for Jesus Christ. That's what's needed at this time. Well, I'm going to give you some definitions because I just used a word a bit ago that some of you probably didn't catch on to. Caliphate. You probably know what a pope and the papacy is, right? A pope is a world leader that claims to have both religious and political power. A caliph is a world Muslim leader who claims to have both political and religious power. In the papacy, it has other countries, but the pope is considered the one over them all, right? In a Muslim sense, you have a Muslim world empire. There may be emirates, countries, but the caliph is the one over them all. Did you just catch how similar these two guys are? They're both church-state combination. And they both want to rule the world. So you have the papacy, king of the north, and every time you have a king of the south, is there room for two guys that both claim to rule the world politically and spiritually? So when you have Arab caliphates, you have the Crusades. When you have Ottoman caliphates, you have the Ottoman conflict. And if you get a caliphate again, you're going to get a what? Another holy war. By the way, definition of a holy war, it's not up here. Definition of a holy war is when both sides act like the devil in the name of God. And if you're acting like the devil, you're really of the devil. That makes a holy war the most unholy of all wars. All right? Now, another one. Islamist. These are what are often referred to as the radicals. They want to bring about a global caliphate by force. They want the whole world to be forced to become Muslim. And they want to set up their capital city in a place called Al-Quds, which the world knows as Jerusalem. Well, if radical Muslims want to conquer Jerusalem and Jews want it and Christians want it, do you think Daniel 11 with the idea that Jerusalem gets caught in the middle just might have some accuracy today? There is no way to avoid what Daniel 11 describes. Jerusalem is in the crosshairs. Who is involved as Islamist? Well, the Muslim Brotherhood out of Egypt, they're Islamist. Al-Qaeda is Islamist. Islamic State. By the way, if you're in an area controlled by the Islamic State, they may beat you for using that term. Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, or Islamic State of the Levant. What's wrong with that? That limits them. They just want to be the Islamic State for the world. Because their caliph, they believe, is in charge of the world. Erdogan in Turkey, the president of Turkey, he wants to be the caliph and control the world religiously and politically. Yes, he does. He says so multiple times. Then Iran, they want to. Boko Haram, El-Shabaab, there's lots of other groups that are involved in this. They all want to conquer Jerusalem and make it the Muslim capital of the world and force everyone to be Islamic. Those are the radicals. That's not everybody. There are other Muslims. The moderates. They're opposed to this idea. They are signing what's called the Abrahamic Accords. They are lining up with Israel. Why was it that just before the Trump administration left office, a whole bunch of Arab Islamic countries signed agreements with Israel? Remember, Turkey is not Arab. Iran is not Arab. They both want to be caliphs and control the Islamic world. They're not sure who was going to win the presidential election. And they knew there was one power in this world that would not surrender to radical Islam. And that would be Israel. Because for Israel to surrender is to commit suicide. And all of a sudden you had Muslim groups signing normalization agreement, not groups, countries signing agreements with Israel. It's all about what's being described in Daniel 11, what's going on in our world today. The sides are taking place. Now, in 2011, the Review and Herald published our book. And looking at this verses 40 to 45, I had 6 expectations of what was going to happen in the future. Now, interestingly, it takes the Review at that time, they no longer exist as a publishing house as such. They don't print anymore, put it that way. It took them at that time 2 years from rough manuscript to book in hand. I used to be on book committee. I knew what it took. And when in May of 2011, when we were negotiating about whether or not they were going to publish my book, I said, look, if you guys are going to publish it, I want the book in hand by the 1st of August. This is May. Normally it takes them 2 years. And I'm asking for a few months. The president of the Review signed the contract. His employee said, we can't do that. And he said, well, we already agreed to make it happen. We got the book 2 days before August 1. Here's the reason I was pushing them. I told them, I want this book to be prophecy, not history when it comes out. Because I wasn't sure how quickly things would unfold. But here were the expectations. Number one, that radical Islam, the caliphate people, would attack or anger the papacy. The papacy would call for war against radical Islam. The United States and its allies would become the military enforcers for the papacy. That's Revelation 13. Radical Islam would be overthrown. Moderate Islam would follow papal-led Christianity, and some Muslims would follow Jesus in the Bible. Those were my expectations. Well, 2014, in the summer, all of a sudden stuff began to pop in sequence. Number one, we got an Islamic State, a caliph and a caliphate. The news articles that you're about to see come in date order. You're just going to watch the whirlwind unfolding. I could have had a lot more, believe me. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the self-proclaimed leader of the Islamic State stretching across Iraq and Syria, has vowed to lead the conquest of Rome as he called on Muslims to immigrate to his new land to fight under its banner around the globe. I didn't realize when I wrote the book it was going to be so clear that on day one, the Islamic State, we now have a functioning king of the South for the first time since the Ottoman Empire. On day one, he said his target's Rome. Next question is, how long will it take for the king of the North, the papacy, to respond and call for war? because the Pope called for war and we got the Crusades. The Pope called for war, we got the Holy League. I'm expecting prophecy to be fulfilled at third ground. 5.5 weeks later, on August 7, the Pope called for war. How many of you noticed it? Because we're not focused on Daniel 11, the prophecy for the time of the end, we don't even notice when stuff happens. Here's what happened. Pope Francis appealed to world leaders on Thursday to help end the crisis in northern Iraq after a sweeping advance by radical Islamic State militants forced thousands of residents of Iraq's biggest Christian town to flee their homes. His Holiness addresses an urgent appeal to the international community to take action to end the humanitarian tragedy now underway. He called for military action, and I'll get specifically in a bit to prove that was military action he wanted. On August 7, I was pretty well waiting for the Pope to do that. I knew what was going on in Iraq and Syria. I was paying close attention to it. I was at a ASI convention in Grand Rapids, Michigan in August. First weekend of August, ASI convention. And I had a break. There wasn't anybody really around walking through the exhibits. I got out my computer and I did a quick search of what was going on in the world, and I hit this. And I realized this is the official papal call for action that would put us into the third and final conflict. And I tried to share that with a couple of people and nobody seemed to care because they weren't studying Daniel 11. I'm at an Adventist ASI convention and nobody cares. And a little bit later, there was absolutely nobody in the exhibit hall. They were having some meeting in the big convention center main room. No guest in the hall. About from here to the back door away from me, there was a guy sitting in his booth with nothing to do. His name, Robert Fulkenberg Sr., former General Conference president, now in charge of Share Him Ministries. By the way, I can tell you that Elder Fulkenberg had a lot more fun after he was out of office doing what he loved, which is evangelism. He enjoyed that much more. But anyway, he was sitting there with nothing to do. And I told my wife, the exhibit's yours, I'm going fishing. I left and I took a book and a DVD with me. And I headed down to Elder Fulkenberg. And I said, Elder Fulkenberg, I'd like to talk to you for a minute. You have some time? He said, sure, have a seat. There was 2 chairs there. I sat down and I said, I've got a book and a DVD to give you, but you don't need to take it. I said, I know what it's like to have people giving me books and DVDs and stuff all the time. If you want it, it's yours. If you don't want it, I'll keep it. He said, tell me about it. And so I told him what was going on in Daniel 11 and how I believed at that very moment we were seeing the third and final conflict open up wide. At the end of it, I said, would you like the book? He said, yes, I would. I'll take the DVD too. So I left it and went on my way. A couple of days later, the people who were making DVDs and selling them for us called me up and said, hey, Elder Fulkenberg just ordered 30 of your DVDs. I thought, he did listen. A couple of days later, they called me and said, Elder Fulkenberg wants to talk to you. Can we give him his phone number, your phone number? I'm like, duh, yes. And for the last 2 years of his life, he and I were just back and forth in contact a lot. He was kind of my mentor in how to get through issues with the church organization. He had them, and so did I, and he knew how to handle it. But at that moment, we should be entering it. The next thing up should be the US as the military enforcer for the papacy. And the next day, the President of the United States says, America is coming to help. And within 36 hours of the papal call for action, the United States struck the Islamic State for the first time ever. Up until that point, the US had never hit the Islamic State. Pope calls for action, and the US hits. I'm going, wow. Bang, bang, bang. It's there. Why aren't we studying Daniel 11? That should put us into the third conflict, just before the loud cry and the close of the judgment. This is God's wake-up call to get serious. But then the media starts saying, oh, the United States really shouldn't have been hitting the Islamic State like they did with military. The Pope really wanted humanitarian action, not military action. And so out comes papal representatives around the world, and here is one of the highest ones. The Holy See's ambassador to the United Nations, Silvano Tomasi, this weekend supported U.S. airstrikes aimed at halting the advance of Sunni Islamic State militants, calling for intervention now before it's too late. Keep reading. While the Vatican vocally disapproved of the US-led campaign in Iraq in 2003 and the 2013 plan for airstrikes on Syria, fearing both might make the situation worse for Christians on the ground, fears of ethnic cleansing by Islamists has forced the policy change. The man of peace called for war. Why? Because the Islamists, the King of the South supporters, were pushing him. Daniel 11, the King of the South pushes and the King of the North hits back. Revelation 13 gives us who his military enforcer is. It's all playing. From that time on, Obama and the United States were called the dog of Rome by the Islamic State. Why would the United States be the dog of Rome? Let's see. The papacy says bite and the US bites. That's why. Pretty simple. Why didn't Seventh-day Adventists, who for over a century have been saying the United States is the enforcer for the papacy, not realize it was happening? Because you were just waiting for Sunday laws. If you're going to wait for that, you're going to wait too long to wake up. The prophecy that tells you about the time of the end is Daniel 11. Revelation 13 will tell you who the ally of the King of the North is, and Revelation 11 will tell you who the ally of the King of the South is in the final push. But you have to understand Daniel 11 first to understand how the allies work together. Then, by the time we get to September 2015, the Pope heads for the United Nations. Putin is there, Obama's there, but who gets the coverage of the media? Pope did, Francis. But shrewdly, methodically, and with a showman's flair, the soft-spoken 78-year-old Argentinian Jesuit priest named Pope Francis showed Thursday that he is running to become president of the planet. And the Huffington Post was ready to endorse him. Folks, let me show you how simple it is. Why did the world follow the papacy at the Crusades? Because the world was afraid of a radical Muslim caliphate that was killing people. Why did the world follow the Pope at the time of the Ottoman Empire with the Holy League? Because they were afraid of a radical Muslim group that was killing people. Why would the world follow the Pope at the time of the end? Same reason they did before. It's now that simple to explain. I don't think this wave can stop, said Sonia Licht of the International Center for Democratic Transition. The global North must be prepared that the global South is on the move, the entire global South. This is not just a problem for Europe, but for the whole world. How many of you blame Afghanis that are trying to get out of Afghanistan right now? If you were there, would you want out? That's really not much different in Syria, in Iraq, Libya. A whole bunch of places are like that. If you were there, you'd want out too. By the way, radical Muslims have killed more Muslims than they have Christians. Don't think most Muslims like radical Muslims. They don't. But anyway, so the South is pushing the North. Immigration is pushing up out of those territories, and they want to get out. And where do they want to go? Basically, any plane headed towards the US or Europe, get me out of here, right? Even hanging on to planes on the outside of them while they're taking off. The South is pushing against the North. That's what Daniel said to watch for. Then we had a US presidential campaign. And we had a president that, or a campaigner that started talking about building a wall on the southern border, a push from the south. Haven't heard much about a northern border issue, have you? Even though you border the northern border, you hear about the southern border. Mexico tries to control the flow at their southern border. You go down, it's the southern border that's getting pushed on. Even over here, the same in Europe. Candidate Trump was asked what he would do with radical Islam. He said, the point is they, meaning radical Islam, want to do serious harm. We have to take them out. We have to take them out very, very swiftly and viciously if necessary. We've got to destroy the brand of jihad. That's King of the North language. And, you know, in Daniel 11, it says that Egypt and many countries would be overthrown like a what? Whirlwind. Sounded like what Trump's talking about, didn't it? And then he was sworn in. And his inauguration, and I was waiting, I was listening, and he said what I thought was coming. We will reinforce old alliances and form new ones and unite the civilized world against radical Islamic terrorism, which we will eradicate completely from the face of the earth. Oh, he didn't want to put very many troops on the ground, new ones. What he did was hit with impressive air power, and he allied himself with Muslims that hated radical Islam to do the groundwork. And he doubled the number of bombs and missiles landing on the Islamic State. Pounded them. Media didn't really cover it much, but he literally doubled the amount of firepower hitting them. Then he said he was going to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Woo-hoo. You want to set off a firestorm in the radical Muslims and make them all self-identify who's radical and who's moderate? This will do it. And within a week, 6 days later, there's a meeting in Turkey of all the people that are offended with Trump's statement about Islam. I mean, about Jerusalem being the capital of Israel. Now notice, Soleimani, commander of the Al-Quds force, says his nation is ready to support Palestinian forces in the Gaza Strip, days after the US recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital. I find statements in the media all the time that are just crying out to be explained. That's loaded. Number one, Soleimani is the commander of the Al-Quds force, the Iranian special forces. Now you have to know Iran is Shiite Muslim and the Palestinians are Sunni Muslim. They don't always like each other very well. But what did he just say? He's going to help arm them and take care of them. The enemy of my enemy is my friend, often in the Middle East. And so he's commander of the Al-Quds force. Al-Quds, anybody remember where Al-Quds is? I told you a while ago. It's Jerusalem. Let's see, the special forces of Iran are called the Jerusalem Force. Get an idea why Israel does not like Iran very well? They're coming for you. They're making it clear in their names and their beliefs and their religious beliefs. And so here you have the media putting Jerusalem in the paragraph and Al-Quds, and they don't tell you it's the same place. So Iran is supporting the Palestinians because they want Jerusalem. That's what that statement really says. Here's a picture of Soleimani. Here's Soleimani. This is an Iranian propaganda picture, okay? Or poster, whatever you want to call it. He's got a radio in his hand. Anybody recognize the building behind him? It's the White House. There's the US flag falling after an explosion rips it off the roof. In the wording here, in the part that's English, it says, "We will crush the USA under our feet." Soleimani the second most powerful man in Iran, is in an Iranian-approved picture attacking the White House. He claims to have over 1,000 terror cells at that time in the United States. In other words, he's calling a hit in. Anybody remember who lived in the White House right about then? Trump. Was Trump known for really liking people who attacked him or going after them? Wasn't always very friendly, was he? If you attack Trump, expect to be a scorched earth policy back against you. That's pretty well the way he operated, be it politically, militarily, whatever it was. And so we have this picture. Don't expect Trump's going to appreciate it. Then the Saudi prince comes out and makes the clear definition between who's a moderate and who's a radical. Saudi Arabia's powerful crown prince, Mohammed bin Salman, has described Turkey as part of a triangle of evil, along with Iran and hardline Islamist groups. Those are all those who want to set up Jerusalem as the capital of the Muslim world. The Saudi prince also accused Turkey of trying to reinstate the Islamic Caliphate, and they are, abolished nearly a century ago when the Ottoman Empire collapsed. In this triangle, they are trying to promote the idea that our duty as Muslims is to reestablish the Caliphate, that the glory of Islam is in building an empire by force. We have no duty anymore to fight to spread Islam, but notice, this is a Muslim leader clearly saying we should not be fighting to force people to be Muslim. That's interesting, knowing that within the country, you're not allowed to change religions. But anyway, but in the triangle of evil, they want to manipulate Muslims to tell them their duty as Muslims requires the establishment of a Muslim empire. I believe the Palestinians and the Israelis have the right to have their own land, but we have to have a peace agreement to assure the stability for everyone and to have normal relations. All of a sudden, Saudi Arabia comes out, Israel has a right to exist, so does Saudi Arabia. That was earth-shattering in the Middle East. Within days, there was gunfire in the Saudi palace, assassination attempt. Mohammed bin Salman went into hiding, and he was not seen for a week or two. Iran started celebrating his death, and then he showed back up, hating Iran worse than ever. But it's clearly saying Islamists are the radicals, the Caliphate believers that want Jerusalem. And now here's the Saudis saying Israel has a right to exist. He's willing to negotiate that one away. Then the US Embassy is opened in Jerusalem on May 14, 2018. That's not just any date. It happens to be exactly 70 years to the day from the founding of the nation of Israel, the modern nation of Israel. Why is that so important? Look at this coin put out by the Temple Group in commemoration. Recognize this guy? Donald Trump. Recognize that one? Cyrus. After 70 years of captivity, catch the date and the number of years, 70 years of captivity, Cyrus says Jerusalem is yours, and they rebuild the temple. After 70 years of statehood, Trump says Jerusalem is yours, and they believe that they would rebuild the temple. Now, interestingly, Trump's vice president, a guy by the name of Pence, is a strong believer in rebuilding the temple on the Temple Mount. Anyway, I don't know if we're going to see him again in the future or not, but I think somebody like him may easily come up. But give you an idea of the stuff brewing behind the scenes. Then the Pope goes to the United Arab Emirates and signs agreements with them. And the Atlantic gives this article, and their subtitle was "The Meaning of the Pope's Historic Visit to the United Arab Emirates." What has changed in brief is the dual rise of the Muslim Brotherhood and the Islamic State. The following analysis applies equally to the Emirates and to Saudi Arabia. Facing direct challenges, the Gulf states calculated that they could no longer appease Islamists and should instead crush them. That is precisely what they have done both in the UAE and in Saudi Arabia. Stop for a moment. We're approaching the 20th anniversary of September 11. Most of those terrorists were Islamists that came from Saudi Arabia. At that time, Saudi Arabia was just trying to appease them and leave them alone. Just leave us alone, we'll leave you alone. They have since changed strategies. They have been beheading the Islamists in Saudi Arabia. Their numbers of capital executions by beheading skyrocketed when they made the change. So they made a change away from radical Islam towards the US and Europe. Let's keep going. The institutional authorities of Islam and the political authorities with which they are aligned have just bought themselves an institutional ally. Stop there for a moment. Who's the ally? They just signed allegiances with the Pope. In Daniel 11, you have part of the Muslim world following the King of the North. You're watching it happen, and the Abrahamic Accords are following as a part of this in its train. If not a theological one, whether the alliance keeps the theological barbarians, meaning the radicals, at bay is another question. So Iran comes out with another picture. I find their pictures interesting when I get hold of them. So you have several ships, and you can't see them that clearly, but each one of these ships is either flying an Israeli or a US flag that's sinking and burning. And by the way, during this time, they were actually attacking several ships out in the Persian Gulf. Well, they did a couple of weeks ago too again. So you have these ships burning. You guys know where that is, don't you? It's Dome of the Rock. It's up on the Temple Mount. I've been in that one. If looks could kill, I am not a Muslim. And I was not especially, I and the group of people I was with. I mean, there are guys with machine guns standing by to keep us alive, but you know, that's the only reason we're alive. They don't want infidels in there. Then I went down, along with this group I was with, down into this little tunnel along the Wailing Wall, back where a bunch of the right-wing rabbis are. And they're in there praying. And they were sticking their tongues out at us and stuff and giving us dirty looks. Up above, if looks get killed, we're dead. Down below, if looks get killed, we're dead. Think Jerusalem might get caught in the middle? In all cases, there are men with machine guns standing by to kill anybody that starts to kill somebody. What a crazy world we live in. But take a closer look at the picture. This is from Iran, keep that in mind. What's the water? Is it water? Look at the, see the tassels along the edge? The waves are tassels. Ever seen a Palestinian headscarf? Why is the Al-Quds force, the Jerusalem force, attacking ships? Because they have their sights on Jerusalem and they're using the Palestinians to get there. Picture's worth 1,000 words. That's exactly what's playing out in the world. Why are they supporting Hezbollah in Iran? I mean, in Lebanon, because they want Israel. Why are they supporting, putting all their supporting Shiite groups in Syria? Because they're after Israel. It's all pulling their noose in to get Al-Quds, Jerusalem. Then al-Baghdadi was killed. Was that the end of the Islamic State? No. There were lots of caliphs during the Arab caliphates. There were lots of caliphs during the Ottoman caliphates. You kill one caliph, they just name a new one. I think his name's Kardashi or something like that, and they nicknamed him the professor. And he is not seen often at all. Something about being seen, you tend to die. And so he's hiding. But why is President Biden having such an awful week at the end of the week? Because the Islamic State showed up in Afghanistan and killed at least 13 Americans and something like 170 Afghanis in a suicide attack. there at the airport. Yeah. Islamic State has spread. Trump did not wipe it out. There's a much more radical attack against them yet future. January of 2020. This is something called the Drudge Report. It is just a list. Every one of these statements is a headline from some world newspaper or news organization. And I want you to notice it leads off with it's war. Did you know the United States went to war in January of 2020 with Iran? We didn't. But by a couple of hours, they thought we would be at war within a couple of hours. We almost were. They just kind of got their headline out a bit early. Because at the time that I took this and I used it in a presentation, because I was walking out on the platform moments after I downloaded that onto a slide. At that moment, Iranian missiles were falling on at least 2 US military bases. Because the US had just taken out Soleimani, the number 2 man, the guy in the picture with the radio calling in a strike on the White House. Trump said, take him out. And he was blown to pieces outside the Baghdad airport. And Iran strikes back. I mean, you wipe out the vice president of the United States, you think the US might strike back? And that's what they were doing. And Trump had said, as this attack began, if any Americans die, he'd already told Iran this, I have marked 58 targets that are already zeroed in on missile guidance systems. 1 for each hostage during the Iranian hostage crisis. And they include, listen carefully, military sites, religious sites, and cultural sites. Do you hear anything wrong with that list? The United States, following Geneva Rules of War kind of idea, avoids the attack of religious and cultural targets. And Trump said, if you kill any Americans, I will go after religious and cultural targets in your country. If we would have gone to war that night, and we almost did, it was holy war. It was not conventional war. The radical Muslims are already after all those kind of sites and after civilians. Trump's saying, I'm coming back in the same way if you kill any Americans. But no Americans died. 50 to 100 got concussions, but no Americans died. I believed it was God saying, not quite yet, my people aren't ready. The world's not ready. I believe it's coming. Then, a couple of days later, had the Muslims given up on this idea? This is up on the Temple Mount in the Alaska Mosque. Siam can be seen telling the enthusiastic crowd that 3 prophecies would soon be fulfilled, that the rightly guided caliphate will be established, that Jerusalem will be liberated and established as its capital, and that Islam would achieve world domination. This was what was being preached on the Temple Mount right afterwards. In case you were wondering where I get this kind of information, it's rather public information in the Muslim world. Then came COVID. And the West totally forgot about the spread of radical Islam. But it didn't slow down. And in many ways, it sped up. This was just one day last summer that I decided to I went to Jihad Watch and I just took one day. You can go to jihadwatch.com and you can see what's happening all over the world every day. Mozambique, Islamic jihadists attack Doctors Without Borders. Red-green Twitter storm to America, burn baby burn. There were protests going in America and the Muslims joined in against the US. Philadelphia Muslim cleric says demonstrations are useless, fighting and bloodshed are needed. They were trying to ramp up the demonstrations in the US. Burkina Faso, Muslims murder 58 people in attacks targeting Christians. Nigeria, Muslim shooter hacked to death 9 Christians, kidnapped 7 others. A Muslim historian, US collapsing, Islam is only power to fit and lead world. France and Germany will be Islamic republics. That's one day and that's every day. but the media doesn't cover it. Crisis Magazine. There was an article that got my attention in Crisis Magazine, and I always like to know, people ask me, where do you get your news sources? I said, from all over. I don't trust any of them. I always try to find out what their biases are. By the way, you have biases too, so do I. It's hard to not have them. But I want to know what the bias is. And so Crisis Magazine, I went to their about site. I go to about sites of all kinds of groups. And here's what I find. The West has arrived at a crisis point. We must decide, do we serve the city of God or the city of man? They're a conservative Catholic news site. So they're going to come at it from a Catholic, conservative Catholic viewpoint. So when they're talking about the city of God, that's the church, Catholic Church. Does our first allegiance lie with the church or with the state? Do we profess the ancient and immutable faith or the latest fashionable secular dogmas? Not since the Cold War have we experienced such violent political, cultural, and spiritual unrest. Not since the Civil War has our country been divided so bitterly against itself. Our world civilization is attacked from the far left within and radical Islam without. They recognize something. They're under attack from Islam. Daniel 11 says that. But what they also recognize, they're attacked from the far left, Marxism, etc. And Revelation 11 gives that as the ally, the king of the south at the time of the end. I'll explain that this afternoon. Biden wins election, and that tends to embolden the radical Muslims. Here's the way it kind of works. Radical Islam seems to gain territory and power during left-leaning administrations. Right-leaning administrations tend to pound them. Which one do they grow under? Both. They lose territory under right-leaning ones, but they grow underground, and because they're under attack, they get more supporters. And under left-leaning administrations, they gain territory and they gain supporters because they're gaining in territory. It's kind of crazy. Radical Islam is growing under both of them. In other words, neither of them works. I'll explain that this afternoon. Then we had this slaughter of 50 men in Mozambique. I mean, it just continued, and kidnapping the women. Washington Times, Pentagon ramps up the attacks on resurgent ISIS. It is not defeated. Oh, no kidding. Civil war is brewing in France between Islamists and France, and military leaders are plainly telling the government in open letters to the press that civil war is coming. What was happening in Israel in May during that 11-day conflict was simple. Hamas is trying to show that it is the real rulers of the Islamic cause, and they want to side with all who want to take Jerusalem by force, and they're getting support on that. Even though in some ways the radical Muslims are growing territory under Biden, don't think they like him. Here's a picture that Al-Qaeda let loose. I forget if it's Al-Qaeda, Islamic State. In other words, it's in Washington, D.C., and they're preparing the beheading. This is the kind of stuff that they put on their websites. Senator Lindsey Graham warns all Israel News that the IDF Israeli Defense Force may have to launch preemptive strike against Iran's nuclear facility soon. Biden's refusal to get tough with Iran is forcing Israel into a nightmare scenario, Graham said, adding, I've never been more worried about Israel having to use military force than I am right now. Remember, Iran says it's going to take Israel and make it the capital of Islam. And at the time of this, it was announced that Iran had a breakout time period of 10 weeks. Breakout time period means that within 10 weeks, or approximately 10 weeks from then, Iran would have enough nuclear material to make a nuclear weapon. Israel has said they will never allow that to happen. Israel has said that in the past about countries that were developing nuclear capabilities. Libya was trying to do something and some airplanes flew over and they no longer had the facilities. And everybody figured Israel did it, but Israel said no comment. Syria was developing nuclear capabilities. Some airplanes flew over and Syria no longer had the facilities and Israel said no comment. Now Israel says, if the world doesn't stop Iran, we will. Remember, Iran wants to set up a caliphate in Jerusalem. If Israel attacks Iran, there are hundreds of thousands of missiles pre-positioned around Israel. Hamas, Hezbollah, Sinai Peninsula, Syria, and they will all launch at Israel. Hundreds of thousands of missiles. Israel knows that, and they are still willing to attack Iran because they feel they have no option. Anybody ever been on Masada? Masada is over by the Dead Sea. It's a fortress that was built by Herod up on top of this mountain. And during the Jewish revolt against Rome, when Jerusalem was destroyed a few years later, their last holdout was Masada. And they were under attack. And the Romans were using Israelites to build the attack ramps, building ramps, huge ramps out of the desert going up to this mountain fortress. Earthen ramps. They're still there to this day. There's a lot of dirt in them. And the men inside of the city and inside of the fortress would not kill their brothers and sisters outside that were forced into building that ramp. And when it came time for the Romans to assault, just before the assault, they put food and stuff over the walls. Let the Romans know, we have plenty of food, we can throw it over. When the Romans breached the walls, there was no fight, because inside they found them all dead. They all committed suicide rather than kill Jews on the outside or to fight with the Romans, because it was a hopeless fight. They did not want to be taken prisoner. But today, all Israeli military officers are sworn in at Masada with an oath that says never again. They will never again not fight. And what you're looking at, 10 weeks from the end of July, that's this fall. I don't know if Iran will continue its rate. It could stop. It could pause. But there was a reason the Prime Minister of Israel was in Washington, D.C. yesterday. They're talking about it because Israel is not going to back down. I don't know what's coming per se and how it happens, but radical Islam is taken out. Yesterday, Biden said he will track down and destroy whoever was behind that attack at the airport. That's starting to sound like Trump. I don't know if the counterattack really hits from the left or the right. It tends to be the right normally, but when the left gets mad, they can do it too. Islamic State is pushing, Iran is pushing, Turkey is pushing, Al-Qaeda is pushing. Radical Islam is on the move. A pushback is to be expected. Nigeria, so in the first 200 days of this year, 3,462 Christians were killed by Muslims. Did you catch that? What if Christians would have killed that many Muslims? That would have been world news. But the other is overlooked. It's interesting to watch. Al Jazeera. What does Al Jazeera is a Muslim Brotherhood-friendly news organization in the Middle East. Middle East leaders are closely watching Afghanistan and making their conclusions about the unreliability of the U.S. as a partner. Foreign fighters are flocking to Afghanistan to launch a new terror war on the West as Taliban tears through the country. What you have, radical Islam is greatly emboldened, the Marxist countries are emboldened, and the political right is furious, and they're chomping at the bit, wanting to come back in and get even. That sounds exactly ripe for the final part of the whirlwind. Well, let's just get to that. So I'm expecting radical Islam to go down, moderate Islam follow papal-led Christianity, and some Christians to come together to proclaim Jesus and his coming. And let's just read it quickly and I'll wrap up. But news from the east and the north shall trouble him. Therefore, he shall go out with great fury to destroy and annihilate many. And he shall plant the tents of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain. Yet he shall come to his end and no one will help him. So we have tidings, good news from the east and the west that make the king of the north mad, and he goes out to destroy and annihilate many. Who is that after he takes out Islam? Revelation 13, those people that are following God. The ones in the middle. Tidings from the east, Edom, Moab, and Ammon are east of Jerusalem. Tidings out of the north. God calls a remnant out of Islam. He calls a remnant out of papal-led Christianity, out of the north. Get this. Edom, Moab, and Ammon are all Abrahamic relatives. And he's using that as a tie. We have the nation of Israel and Western Jordan come side by side. And so geopolitically, they come side by side. Politically, it's one of the friendliest borders Israel has with Jordan. And religiously, God's Israel of faith has a group of Muslims that come in side by side with them. It all fits. And Joel 2, and it shall come to pass afterward that I will pour out my spirit on all flesh. Your sons and your daughters shall prophesy. Your old men shall dream dreams. Your young men shall see visions before the coming of the great and awesome day of the Lord. So we have a promise that before Jesus returns, there's going to be a lot of dreams and visions. And by the hundreds of thousands, Muslims are having dreams and visions of Isa, Jesus, the righteous one, the man in white. And they are told in the visions that they're to trust in Jesus as their Lord and Savior for the forgiveness of their sins, and they're supposed to follow the Bible, the book, as their authority. I have a friend that has an underground ministry in Muslim countries, Afghanistan being one of those countries. And he has over 500,000 Muslims that are a part of his underground network following Jesus in the Bible. Did you catch? I said Muslims following Jesus. They don't consider themselves Christians. Do you know why? In Muslim lands, if you're a Christian, you're marked as a follower of the Pope, and they don't want to be followers of the Pope because they're followers of Jesus in the Bible. When I walk into a mosque, and I do on occasion, I introduce myself as a follower of Jesus and the book, a true person of the book. You see in the Quran, there are people of the book, the Bible, that are to be respected. How do I introduce myself with that? So I'm a true person of the book. I don't eat pork. I don't drink alcohol. I believe the whole book, not half of it, and I don't worship on the Crusader Day of Worship. And they look at me and say, who are you? Tell me more. Kind of interesting to do. It's only gone bad once. I ran into a radical mosque in Southern California. That was not fun. 2 months later, 17 people were killed by 2 members of that mosque. But, like I said, most mosques aren't that way. By the way, have you ever gone to a Christian church and not gotten a good reception? I've had a couple of times, even in Adventist churches, it didn't go so well. Mostly it's really good, right? Most mosques you go to, it's really good. They're glad to have a guest. A few of them, it's a little different. But anyway, we have these Muslims that are following Jesus in the Bible. Let's see, if they're following Jesus in the Bible, they're my brothers and sisters in Christ, don't you think? When I'm in a mosque, I never say I'm a Christian, because they'd understand that to be a follower of the Pope, and I am not. This afternoon, I'm going to get into the end time allies. But let me just give you this little heads up. No political party saves you. No politician saves you. No church saves you. Only Jesus saves you. And God's people always get caught in the middle. And what I'm going to describe this afternoon is how Daniel 11 is also describing the shaking that has already begun. All right, so it's time to take Jesus and the Bible seriously. Please study Daniel 11:12. If you agree or disagree, I don't mind that, but please study. I believe we've got good people in all the viewpoints that love Jesus and the Bible. Share with other people. Do public seminars, do home groups, do whatever. It's time to wake up and get serious about Jesus. And the last thing, make sure you're praying for yourself, for others, that God changes us from the inside out. Okay. I was asked earlier about materials. Let me just say you can go to my website. If there's enough interest, I'll hang around for after. I'll come back to the church after sunset tonight to sell materials. I just won't sell anything on Sabbath. But if there's people that say they're really wanting stuff, yes, we have books, DVDs, all kinds of different materials. But God's been really good for our ministry. He's kept us going. Made it clear into my mind that I'm supposed to be trying to wake people up. Don't know what it's done for you. Hopefully I've got your mind stirring. Because folks, if I'm right, we're really close. And somebody says, how close is close? Here we go. I'll tell you. I believe everything in Bible prophecy could easily be fulfilled, and we're out of here in less than a year. However, God could pause it as he's already done. And we could be here for a long time. Okay, I will repeat it. I will repeat it. I believe that everything in prophecy could easily be fulfilled in less than a year, and we're out of here with Jesus coming. At the same time, God can put a pause on it, which I've already believed I've seen him do. And even if you're one of the youngest people in this room, you need to be ready to die of old age. And if you're not ready to be out of here in less than a year or ready to die of old age, you aren't ready. But we are definitely living in a time that 1 year or less is an option. If Israel attacks Iran, this world explodes. If Israel does not attack Iran, and Iran uses a nuclear weapon, this world explodes. The Islamic State is trying to make this world explode. Iran wants it. Oh, I need to say this. Why do radical Muslims want the world to explode? They believe that if they can bring in chaos, that God will act in their behalf and convert the world to Islam. Their role is to turn the world into chaos. They don't have to win. They just need to create the chaos, and God will win for them, is their belief. But God's people get caught in the middle. Who do you have permission to hate from Jesus? No one. You've got to love a jihadist, and you've got to love anybody from any other perspective. If you lean left, you've got to love people that lean right. If you lean right, you've got to love people who lean left. I think God almost has a sense of humor in this, because God loves us each one, and we need to know that. Let's just bow our heads for a closing prayer. I'm just going to end with prayer. I think we've went long enough already. Is that okay? All right. Dear Heavenly Father, I thank you for loving us so much. And Lord, we do live in really, really interesting times. And you laid all this out over 2,000 years ago. Lord, help us not to give up. Help us not to hate, but help us to realize that, yes, you do want us to love people. And that we should take the risk even if it leaves us caught in the middle. Thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
I think you put some more.